Welcome. Find a comfortable position, allow your breathing to settle into its natural rhythm, and prepare yourself for a journey back through time. Tonight, we're traveling to ancient Greece, to the world of city-states and marble temples, of philosophy and democracy. But we're not visiting the Greece of popular imagination alone. We're exploring the full spectrum of life in this civilization, from its darkest foundations to its most luminous achievements. In the modern world, we often speak of ancient Greece as the birthplace of democracy, of rational thought, of art and culture that still shapes our world today. And this is true. But democracy, as the Greeks practiced it, rested upon a foundation that would be unthinkable to us now. For every free citizen debating in the assembly, there were perhaps 3 or 4 people who had no voice at all. People who were property, who could be bought and sold, whose labor made possible all the leisure and learning we admire. Tonight, you'll walk in the footsteps of those whose stories are rarely told in such detail. You'll descend into the silver mines that funded Athens' golden age. You'll feel the Mediterranean sun on your back as you harvest olives that you'll never taste. You'll stand in the marketplace as families are separated and lives are valued in drachmas and obols. Then, from those depths, we'll rise. You'll follow the life of Socrates, a man who challenged everything, who chose death over compromise. You'll encounter an impossible artifact, a mechanism so advanced that scholars still marvel at its existence. And finally, you'll recline in a wealthy Athenian home, understanding how leisure built upon labor created space for all those philosophical questions. The contrast between these worlds, between those who built and those who benefited, tells us something profound about human civilization. Not comfortable truths, perhaps, but truths nonetheless. And in understanding them, in sitting with them gently, we might find ourselves drifting, thinking, and eventually releasing our thoughts into sleep. Let's begin. Imagine yourself in the pre-dawn darkness of an Athenian morning, sometime around 420 BCE. The city still sleeps, but you are already awake. Not by choice. You've been awake for some time, actually, lying on a thin mat in a corner of your master's house, waiting for the moment when you must rise. There is no rooster's crow to mark the hour. You've simply learned, through years of consequence, when to wake. You are a slave. The Greek word is doulos, and it encompasses your entire legal existence. You are property, as real and as valued as your master's furniture or livestock. Perhaps more valued if you possess a useful skill, perhaps less if you do not. The distinction between slave and free in ancient Greece was not marked by chains in most cases. Few slaves wore physical restraints as they moved through their daily tasks. The chains were legal, economic, and social, far more effective than iron. Where would you run? Beyond Athens lay other city-states, each with their own slave systems. Your appearance, your accent, your lack of documentation would mark you immediately. The very geography of the Greek world, with its mountains and seas, created natural barriers to escape. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let's step into a specific life, a particular day. You are working in the Laurian silver mines, southeast of Athens. These mines are famous throughout the Greek world. They provide the silver that Athens mints into coins, the coins that fund warships and temples and all the mechanisms of the city-state's power. The mines run deep into the earth, following veins of silver-bearing lead ore through limestone and marble. The journey to the mines begins before dawn. You and perhaps 40 other slaves are roused from a barracks, a simple structure with stone walls and a dirt floor, no windows to speak of. The air inside is thick with the breath of sleeping men, with the smell of unwashed bodies and old food. In summer, the heat is stifling. In winter, the cold seeps through the thin blankets. But you've grown accustomed to both. The human body adapts to almost anything, given time. You file outside into the darkness. An overseer counts you, Not because he cares about you as individuals, but because you represent an investment. Your master, or more likely the contractor who leases you for mining work, has paid for your labor. Losing a slave to escape or accident is a financial loss to be avoided. The walk to the mine entrance takes perhaps half an hour. The path is well worn, bare earth packed hard by thousands of feet over years. As the sky begins to lighten, you can see the landscape around you, dry, rocky terrain, typical of Attica. The vegetation is sparse, low shrubs, aromatic herbs that release their scent when crushed underfoot, the occasional twisted olive tree growing from what seems like pure stone. The mine entrance is a dark mouth in the hillside, narrow, so narrow that you must stoop to enter, and once inside, the ceiling presses down even further. This is deliberate in a sense, not designed for your comfort, but following the veins of ore wherever they lead, regardless of human convenience. You're given a small oil lamp. The flame flickers, unstable, casting moving shadows on the rock walls. The passages branch and rebranch, creating a labyrinth underground. Newer slaves sometimes panic in these tunnels, overwhelmed by the enclosure, the darkness, the weight of earth above. But you've been doing this for years now. You know these passages as well as you once knew the streets of whatever city you came from, before war or debt or misfortune brought you here. Your workplace today is a tunnel so low you must work on your knees or lying on your side. The vein of silver ore runs along the ceiling, barely visible in the lamplight, a dark line against darker stone. Your task is to extract it. You take up a hammer and a chisel. Bronze, not iron. The Greeks understand metals, understand that different tools serve different purposes. The weight of the hammer feels familiar in your hand. You position the chisel against the rock and begin to strike. The sound echoes in the confined space, a sharp ringing that hurts your ears. Strike after strike, hour after hour. Each blow sends a small vibration through your arms and shoulders. After a few hours, your joints ache. After a full day, the ache has settled deep into your bones, a constant companion. The dust is what truly makes the work unbearable. Each strike sends particles into the air. Rock dust, metallic dust from the ore itself, invisible particles that catch in your throat and lungs. You tie a cloth around your face, but it helps only marginally. By midday, you're coughing. By evening, you're spitting dark phlegm. After years of this work, your lungs never fully clear. Many miners develop a chronic cough that eventually stops them from working altogether. At that point, a mining slave becomes worthless, and their fate depends on whether their master feels any obligation to maintain property that no longer produces value. But you're not thinking about years from now. You're thinking about the next hour, the next strike of the hammer, the cramped position that's making your leg go numb. There's no natural ventilation this deep in the mine. The air is stale, depleted of freshness by dozens of lamps and dozens of men breathing. Sometimes, in the deepest passages, lamps begin to gutter and die, not because they've run out of oil, but because the air itself can no longer sustain flame. When this happens, you must retreat, wait for the bad air to dissipate somehow, or simply accept the risk and continue in darkness, working by feel alone. Water seeps through the rock in places. In some tunnels you work ankle-deep in cold, mineral-heavy water that never seems to drain away. The dampness adds to the discomfort, but in a way it's almost welcome. It settles some of the dust, keeps the temperature from becoming completely unbearable. The hours pass slowly. You have no way to track time underground. The rhythm of work becomes its own measure. Chip away at the rock, place the ore fragments in a basket, continue. When the basket is full, you must crawl or crouch walk back through the passages to a larger chamber where other slaves are waiting to transport the ore to the surface. Then back to your spot, to your private battle with the stone. Imagine the physical toll. Your knees are bruised and calloused from kneeling on bare rock. Your hands are covered in small cuts and scrapes that never quite heal because you reopen them daily. Your back aches from the unnatural positions. Your shoulders burn from the repetitive striking motion. Your head throbs from the bad air and the constant noise. And yet you keep working, because the alternative is punishment, because there is no other option, because this is simply what your life is now. When you finally emerge at the end of the day, perhaps 12 hours after you entered, perhaps more, the sudden sunlight is almost painful. Your eyes, adjusted to dimness and lamplight, struggle with the brightness. The fresh air makes you lightheaded briefly, your body readjusting to oxygen that hasn't been breathed and rebreathed. The silver ore you've extracted will be processed elsewhere. It will be crushed, smelted, refined. Eventually, it will become the coins that Athenian citizens use to buy food in the market, to pay taxes, to commission statues of their gods. They will handle this silver without ever thinking about the darkness from which it came, the cramped tunnels, the aching bodies, the shortened lives. You return to the barracks. There's a meal, grain porridge, perhaps some dried fish, a cup of watered wine. Enough to keep you functioning, but rarely enough to satisfy real hunger. The food is the same day after day, week after week. Variety is not a consideration for slaves. After eating, there's a brief period before sleep. You might talk quietly with the other miners, share small observations about the day, gossip about overseers, speculate about things that don't matter. Or you might simply lie down immediately, letting exhaustion take you before the aches and pains have a chance to keep you awake. This is the life of a mining slave. Day after day, year after year, for as long as your body holds out. But not all slaves worked in the mines. Let's shift our perspective. Let's imagine a different kind of servitude. You are working in an olive grove on a rural estate outside Athens. The season is late autumn, the time of harvest. The olive trees, ancient, gnarled, their trunks twisted by centuries of Mediterranean sun and wind, are heavy with fruit. The harvest must be completed before the first storms of winter arrive, or the crop will be ruined. You've been working these groves since you were a child. You were born a slave, born to a mother who was also property of this estate. You've never known freedom, never experienced it even in memory. This is simply the nature of the world as you understand it. The work is hard, but it's not the crushing, lung-destroying labor of the mines. It's the kind of hard that wears you down slowly, over seasons and years, rather than all at once. You carry a long pole, and your task is to beat the branches, knocking the olives to the ground, where other slaves gather them into baskets. The motion is repetitive. Raise the pole, strike the branch, move to the next one. Your arms tire, your shoulders ache, but you've developed the endurance for this over time. The overseer walks among you, watching. He's a free man, hired by the estate's owner to manage the agricultural slaves. He carries a short stick, and he's not afraid to use it on slaves who seem to be working too slowly. You've felt that stick across your shoulders before. You work steadily, demonstrating effort, avoiding notice. The sun is warm on your back. It's still pleasant this late in autumn, not the withering heat of summer that can make fieldwork genuinely dangerous. There's a breeze carrying the scent of the sea, mixing with the dusty smell of the grove, the pungent aroma of crushed olive leaves. Around midday, there's a brief pause. You're given water and a piece of bread. You sit in the shade of the olive trees, grateful for the rest, knowing it will be brief. The owner wants the harvest completed quickly. Time is valuable when you're racing against the weather. After the meal break, back to work. Hours blend together. Strike the branches, move forward, strike again. The rhythm becomes almost meditative, your mind drifting even as your body continues its task. You think about nothing in particular, or perhaps about small hopes. Maybe next year the master will give you a small plot where you can grow your own vegetables, a tiny supplement to your basic rations. Maybe he'll allow you to attend the rural Dionysia, the festival where even slaves sometimes get to watch the performances. Small hopes, because large ones are dangerous. Large hopes lead to disappointment, and disappointment can curdle into something that makes life even harder. By evening, you return to the slave quarters on the estate. These are better than the mining barracks, small rooms, some privacy, even the possibility of maintaining a family life. You have a wife, another slave on the estate, and 2 small children. You see them in the evenings, share your food with them, tell them stories in the hour before sleep. Your children will also be slaves. They belong to the master just as you do. When they're old enough, they'll join the labor force, working in these same groves, or perhaps in the master's house if they show aptitude for domestic service. You try not to think too much about their future. You try to make their childhood as gentle as possible within the constraints of your situation. This is your life. Not as brutally short as the miner's life, but bounded, constrained, never fully your own. Now let's shift perspective once more. Let's go to the city itself, to the Agora, the marketplace at the heart of Athens. It's a bright morning in spring. The Agora is crowded with citizens, merchants, slaves running errands for their masters, foreign traders, philosophers arguing about abstract concepts. The smell of fresh bread from the bakeries mixes with the scent of fish from the morning catch, with leather from the tanners' stalls, with the earthy smell of vegetables piled in baskets. You are standing on a raised platform. You are for sale. Perhaps you were captured in war. Your city lost to Athens in one of the endless conflicts that mark Greek relations. Perhaps you were the child of slaves, raised in a household that's now selling you because the master has died and the estate is being divided. Perhaps you fell into debt and sold yourself or your family members to satisfy creditors. The specifics don't matter much now. What matters is that you're here, on display, being evaluated by potential buyers. An auctioneer stands beside you, calling out your qualities to the crowd. He mentions your age, young enough to be valuable, old enough to have learned useful skills. He mentions your origin. If you're Greek, this might increase your value or decrease it depending on the buyer's prejudices. He mentions your experience. You've worked in a household. You know how to serve at symposiums. You can read and write a little. Potential buyers approach, examining you as they might examine a horse or an ox. They check your teeth, looking for signs of disease or poor nutrition. They feel your arms and shoulders, assessing your physical strength. They ask you questions. Where are you from? What work have you done? Can you cook? Can you keep accounts? You answer carefully. Too much pride might make you seem difficult, likely to cause problems. Too much submission might make you seem broken, lacking initiative. You're trying to present yourself as competent and obedient, the ideal combination from a buyer's perspective. A man in good clothing, clearly a citizen of means, seems interested. He discusses your price with the auctioneer, negotiates, eventually agrees on a sum. Money changes hands. Silver drachmas, possibly minted from ore extracted by miners like the one we imagined earlier. The transaction is recorded. You now belong to this man. Your previous life, whatever it was, has ended. A new one begins, for better or worse. The reality of slavery in ancient Greece is that your experience depended entirely on circumstances outside your control. Some slaves worked as tutors to wealthy children, living in comfortable homes, eating well, even earning the affection and respect of the families they served. Some were skilled craftsmen who were allowed to work independently, paying a portion of their earnings to their masters, but otherwise living almost like free men. These slaves might accumulate money, might even hope to purchase their freedom someday. But these were the fortunate minority. Most slaves worked in fields, in mines, in workshops. Most lived lives of quiet desperation, their labor making possible the leisure and cultural achievement of free citizens. The institution was so fundamental to Greek society that even philosophers who questioned everything else rarely questioned slavery itself. Aristotle would later write that some people are natural slaves, suited by nature to be ruled by others. This wasn't considered a cruel opinion, it was simply an observation, he thought, of the natural order of things. And yet, the Greeks were not entirely comfortable with the institution. They developed elaborate justifications for it, which suggests unease. They made legal distinctions between different types of slaves. They sometimes freed slaves who had served well. They worried at times about having too many slaves, about the danger of outnumbering free citizens. The opportunities for freedom existed, but they were narrow. A slave might be freed in their master's will, particularly if they'd been a trusted household servant for many years. A slave might save enough money, from tips, from being allowed to work independently, to purchase their freedom. A slave might be freed as a reward for some exceptional service, though this was rare. But even freedom came with limitations. A freed slave became a metic, a resident alien, not a citizen. Their children would still be metics. Full citizenship was jealously guarded, passed only through bloodlines. The freed slave could own property, could engage in business, but could not vote, could not serve in the assembly, could not participate in the civic life that defined Athenian democracy. The irony, of course, is that the democracy the Greeks invented, the system of government we still admire and emulate, depended on slavery. The free citizens who spent their days debating policy in the assembly, who served on juries, who created art and philosophy, could do so precisely because slaves were handling the labor that sustained daily life. Imagine yourself as one of those citizens for a moment. You wake in your comfortable home. A slave brings you water for washing. Another slave prepares your breakfast. You dress in a clean chiton that a slave has washed and mended. You step out into the city, perhaps to attend the assembly, perhaps to discuss philosophy with friends. You never think about the invisible labor that makes this possible. Or if you do think about it, it seems natural, the way things should be. The mines continue their work beneath the earth. The fields are tended through the seasons. The households function smoothly. And all of this rests on the backs of people who have no voice, no vote, no legal protection beyond their status as property. The rhythm of their lives continues day after day, year after year. Some endure, some resist in small ways, working slowly, breaking tools accidentally, running away even knowing the slim chances of success. Some find small joys, a friendship with another slave, a religious festival where they're allowed to participate, a master who treats them with relative kindness. And some simply survive, putting one foot in front of the other, working because work is what's required, sleeping because tomorrow will bring more of the same, living lives that leave no mark in the historical record, but which were nonetheless real, felt, experienced as fully as any free citizen's life. This was the foundation of classical Athens, the invisible labor that made visible achievement possible, the uncounted lives that supported counted citizens, the dark depths from which bright culture emerged. As you lie here now, in your comfortable bed, in a world where such absolute slavery is legally impossible, you might feel grateful, or you might feel troubled by the knowledge that human civilization has so often been built on profound inequalities. Or you might simply feel your mind beginning to wander, thoughts drifting like clouds, the weight of history settling gently around you as sleep approaches. Let these images rest in your mind, the miner in his dark tunnel, the farmer under the olive trees, the slaves standing for sale in the marketplace. Not to disturb you, but to remind you that history contains multitudes, that every golden age has shadows, that understanding the past means sitting with uncomfortable truths. And now, having explored these depths, we're ready to rise, to follow one man who walked these same Athenian streets, who benefited from this system he did not create, who nevertheless asked questions that challenged everything, whose life and death still echo across millennia. And so we rise from those shadowed depths, from the tunnels and fields where unnamed thousands labored. We turn now to a single life, one that has echoed across millennia, though the man himself never wrote a single word. We turn to Socrates. He walked the same Athenian streets we've just imagined. He benefited from the same system of slavery that made civic life possible for free citizens. He was, in many ways, an ordinary Athenian, and yet he became the most famous philosopher of ancient Greece, the man who taught Plato, who challenged his entire society, who chose death rather than abandon his principles. Let's begin not with the philosopher, but with the boy. Imagine Athens around 470 BCE. The Persian Wars are fresh in memory. The great battles at Marathon and Salamis, where Greek forces turned back the massive Persian Empire. Athens is riding a wave of confidence, beginning its transformation into the cultural and political center of the Greek world. In a modest neighborhood, a boy is growing up. His name is Socrates. His father, Sophroniscus, is a stone mason, a respectable trade, but not wealthy, not aristocratic. His mother, Finerete, works as a midwife, helping Athenian women through the dangerous process of childbirth. The boy learns his father's trade. From a young age, he's working with stone, marble, limestone, the materials that are transforming Athens into a city of magnificent temples and public buildings. Feel the weight of a hammer in young hands, the resistance of stone that must be shaped patiently, carefully, with technique developed over generations. The dust that coats your arms and tunic, the satisfaction of seeing rough stone transformed into something smooth and purposeful. Socrates learns patience from this work, learns that transformation takes time, that you cannot force stone, that you must work with the material's nature rather than against it. These lessons, though he doesn't know it yet, will shape his approach to philosophy years later. He will call himself a midwife of ideas, helping others give birth to knowledge that's already within them, just as his mother helped women give birth to children. But he's also receiving an education. Athens is beginning to value literacy and learning, even for boys who aren't from wealthy families. Socrates learns to read and write, though he'll never be particularly interested in books. He's exposed to poetry, Homer and Hesiod, the foundational texts of Greek culture. He learns music, learns to play the lyre adequately, if not brilliantly. He wrestles in the gymnasium, develops physical fitness that will serve him well later. As he grows into young manhood, he's called to military service. This is expected of all male citizens. War is a constant reality in the Greek world, and Athens needs soldiers to maintain its growing power. Imagine Socrates, at perhaps 20 years old, outfitted as a hoplite, a heavy infantry soldier. He wears a bronze helmet that frames his face, leaving his eyes and mouth exposed. A bronze breastplate protects his torso. Greaves shield his shins. He carries a large round shield, perhaps 3 feet in diameter, on his left arm. In his right hand, a spear about 8 feet long. At his side, a short sword for close combat. The equipment is heavy, perhaps 60 to 70 pounds of metal and wood. On long marches you feel every pound. Your shoulders ache from the shield's weight. Your neck grows tired from supporting the helmet. Sweat runs down inside the breastplate, making the metal slick and uncomfortable against your skin. But Socrates proves to be an exceptional soldier. In 432 BCE, he serves in the siege of Potidæa, a city that has rebelled against Athenian control. The campaign lasts 3 years. Imagine 3 years away from home, living in military camps, dealing with inadequate food, with disease, with the constant low-level fear that comes with warfare. There's a moment, recorded by those who knew him, when Socrates saves the life of Alcibiades, a young aristocrat who will later become one of Athens' most famous and controversial figures. In the chaos of a skirmish with men falling around them, Socrates keeps his head, protects the wounded Alcibiades, helps him reach safety. The young aristocrat will never forget this debt. There's another moment during the retreat from Delium in 424 BCE when Socrates again distinguishes himself. The Athenian army is fleeing, pursued by Boeotian cavalry. Most men are panicking, running without order, making themselves easy targets. Socrates retreats slowly, deliberately, constantly checking behind him, ready to turn and fight if necessary. His calm demeanor in disaster is noted, remembered, spoken about afterward. But what we really need to understand is what's happening inside his mind during these years. Somewhere in this period, perhaps during long hours on guard duty, perhaps during the tedium of siege warfare, Socrates begins to think differently about the world. He's been exposed to the sophists, the traveling teachers who are becoming popular in Athens. These men offer to teach rhetoric, to teach young aristocrats how to argue persuasively, how to succeed in public life. They charge fees, sometimes substantial ones, and they claim to teach virtue, to teach excellence. But Socrates finds their claims hollow. They teach techniques but not understanding. They teach how to win arguments but not how to discover truth. They claim to know what virtue is, but when you examine their definitions carefully, they fall apart. So Socrates begins his own investigation. He starts asking questions, simple questions on the surface. What is justice? What is courage? What is virtue? What is knowledge? These sound like straightforward inquiries, but Socrates has a way of asking them that reveals how little anyone actually knows. Imagine him in the agora, the marketplace we visited earlier when we stood on the slave auction platform. But now we're seeing it differently. The space isn't just commercial, it's social, political, philosophical. Men gather here to talk, to debate, to conduct business both practical and intellectual. Socrates is there, and he's found someone willing to talk, perhaps a general home from campaign. Socrates approaches respectfully. He's genuinely humble, genuinely curious. "Sir," he might say, "I've heard of your courage in battle. Everyone speaks of your bravery. I'm trying to understand what courage actually is. Could you help me?" The general is flattered. Of course he'll help this odd stonemason understand courage. "Courage," he says confidently, "is standing firm in battle, not fleeing from the enemy." "Ah," says Socrates, "that's helpful. But wait, isn't a skillful retreat sometimes the courageous choice? Didn't we retreat from Delium, and weren't the men who maintained order during the retreat acting courageously?" The general adjusts. "Well, yes, courage is knowing when to stand and when to retreat. It's military wisdom." "So courage is wisdom?" Socrates asks. "But surely wisdom and courage are different virtues. A coward might be very wise enough to avoid danger entirely. And on it goes, question after question, each answer revealing new contradictions, new complexities. The general begins to realize that he doesn't actually know what courage is, not in any clear, definable way. He knows examples of courage. He knows courageous acts when he sees them. But the essence of courage, the thing itself, that remains elusive. This is the Socratic method. Not teaching, exactly, but questioning, not providing answers, but revealing ignorance. Socrates compares himself to a gadfly, stinging the great horse of Athens into wakefulness. He compares himself to a midwife, helping others give birth to understanding. But perhaps, most accurately, he's simply someone who insists on examining everything, who refuses to accept conventional wisdom without scrutiny. Imagine being on the receiving end of this treatment. At first, you're happy to explain what you know. You're confident. You're an expert, after all, in your field. You're a politician who knows about justice, or a priest who knows about piety, or a craftsman who knows about excellence in your craft. But then Socrates starts asking questions. Gentle questions, respectful questions, questions that seem innocent. And somehow, your confident knowledge begins to unravel. The definitions you thought were clear turn out to have exceptions, contradictions. The examples you gave don't quite fit the general rule you stated. Your expertise, so solid a moment ago, now seems uncertain, questionable. Some people find this process enlightening. They're genuinely grateful to discover the limits of their knowledge. Better to know that you don't know than to live in false certainty. These people become Socrates' followers, his students. They gather around him in the agora, in the gymnasium, wherever he happens to be. They watch him work, they learn his method, they begin to question things themselves. But many others find the experience humiliating. Who is this stone mason to question them? Who is he to expose their ignorance publicly? They came into the conversation respected experts, and they leave looking foolish, unable to answer simple questions about their own areas of expertise. Their resentment builds. And it's not just individuals. Socrates is questioning the foundations of Athenian society. When he asks, "What is justice?" he's implicitly questioning the justice of Athenian law. When he asks, "What is piety?" he's questioning traditional religious practices. When he asks, "What is virtue?" he's questioning whether virtue can be taught, whether the aristocratic families that claim to pass down excellence are actually doing so. The young men of Athens, particularly aristocratic young men with leisure time, are fascinated by Socrates. They follow him around, listening to his conversations, learning his techniques. Then they go home and start questioning their fathers using Socratic methods. They question their teachers, their political leaders, the traditional authorities. You can imagine how well this goes over with the fathers and teachers and political leaders. Socrates himself lives simply. He wears the same rough cloak year-round, never a heavy winter cloak, just the same thin garment. He often goes barefoot, even in winter. He eats simple food, drinks moderately even at symposiums where others get drunk. He seems indifferent to physical comfort, to wealth, to conventional success. He married a woman named Xanthippe, and they have children together. Later sources paint Xanthippe as a shrew, constantly nagging Socrates, but this is probably unfair. Imagine being married to someone whose idea of a career is wandering around the marketplace asking annoying questions, accepting no payment, providing no stable income, and accumulating powerful enemies. Your patience might wear thin too. But Socrates is happy in his way. He's pursuing what he sees as his mission. He believes, genuinely believes, that the gods have given him a task: to examine life, to question assumptions, to wake Athens from its dogmatic slumber. There's a story that the oracle at Delphi declared that no one was wiser than Socrates. His response was puzzlement. He knows nothing. But then he realized the oracle's meaning. He's wisest because he alone knows that he doesn't know. Everyone else lives in false confidence. The years pass. Socrates continues his mission. He serves in additional military campaigns, always distinguishing himself by his endurance and courage. He serves in civic offices when required by lot. Athens assigns many positions randomly, believing this prevents corruption and oligarchy. When he serves on the council, he's noted for his integrity, his refusal to be swayed by popular opinion or pressure. There's a famous incident where he refuses to participate in an illegal act, even when commanded by the government. The Athenian assembly, in a fit of popular anger, orders the trial and execution of several generals without proper legal procedure. Socrates is part of the committee that would have to implement this order, and he alone refuses. He stands firm despite threats, despite pressure, insisting that the law matters more than popular will. In this case, the assembly eventually backs down, though the generals are later executed anyway. Another time, during the brief oligarchic coup known as the 30 Tyrants, Socrates is ordered to arrest a man unjustly. Again, he refuses. The tyrants have the power to execute him for disobedience, but before they can act, their regime falls. These incidents establish something important. Socrates isn't just asking abstract philosophical questions. He's willing to stand by his principles even at personal risk. He's not a mere talker. He's someone who lives according to his examined beliefs. But the resentment against him continues to grow. The powerful men he's embarrassed, the fathers whose sons he's corrupted by teaching them to question, the priests whose religious claims he's examined too carefully, the politicians whose policies he's questioned. All of these grievances accumulate, waiting for the right moment. That moment comes in 399 BCE. Socrates is 70 years old. Athens has recently lost the Peloponnesian War to Sparta. The defeat was catastrophic. Athens' empire is gone, its walls torn down, its pride shattered. The city is looking for someone to blame, for scapegoats, for explanations of how the mighty could fall so far. 3 men bring charges against Socrates. Their names are Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon. The charges are impiety, failing to respect the gods Athens respects, and corrupting the youth. Specifically, they claim he teaches the young to disrespect the gods and to disobey their parents and the city's laws. The charges are vague, but they touch on real anxieties. Several of Socrates' associates have become notorious. Alcibiades, whose life Socrates saved years ago, betrayed Athens multiple times during the war. Critias was one of the 30 tyrants who briefly ruled Athens with brutal oppression. The city is nervous about charismatic teachers, about philosophical questioning, about anything that might undermine traditional values and social cohesion. The trial takes place before a jury of 501 citizens chosen by lot. Imagine the scene, a large public space, hundreds of men crowded together, the 3 accusers presenting their case, the crowd's mood uncertain but leaning hostile. Socrates is allowed to defend himself. In Athens, there are no professional lawyers. Each man must make his own case. Friends have probably offered to help him write a speech, to coach him in rhetoric. But Socrates refuses. He'll speak in his own manner, honestly, without rhetorical tricks. His defense is both brilliant and almost deliberately provocative. He doesn't grovel or plead. He doesn't apologize or show false remorse. Instead, he continues doing exactly what he's always done, asking questions, examining assumptions, speaking uncomfortable truths. He addresses the old accusations first, not the formal charges, but the years of rumors and resentment. People say he's a sophist, charging fees to teach. False, he says. He's never charged anyone anything. People say he teaches about natural philosophy, about the sun and moon and stars. Also false. He's interested in human affairs, in ethics and virtue, not in natural science. Then he explains his mission. The oracle said he was wisest. He tested this by questioning those reputed to be wise. Politicians, poets, craftsmen. He found that they all thought they knew things they didn't actually know. He alone knew that he was ignorant. Therefore, he's been trying to show others their ignorance, to wake them up, to make them examine their lives. The unexamined life, he says, in words that will echo for millennia, is not worth living. He addresses the charge of corrupting youth. If he corrupted them, where are they? Where are all these young men whose lives he ruined? Shouldn't they be here testifying against him? Instead, the young men who knew him best are here supporting him, trying to speak on his behalf. He addresses the charge of impiety. He believes in the gods, he says. Perhaps not in the same way others do, but he's never denied their existence. He's questioned what people say about them, yes, but that's examining ideas, not denying divinity. His defense is logically powerful, but emotionally, it's a disaster. He refuses to bring his wife and children before the jury to plead for mercy, a common tactic in Athenian trials. He refuses to beg, to weep, to appeal to the jury's pity. He stands on principle and dignity. The jury votes. By a narrow margin, perhaps 280 to 221, they find him guilty. Under Athenian law, in certain types of trials, the punishment is negotiated. The prosecution proposes a penalty, the defendant proposes a counter penalty, and the jury chooses between them. The prosecution proposes death. Now is Socrates' chance to propose exile or a fine, something the jury might accept to avoid executing a 70-year-old man. His friends are ready to pay a fine on his behalf. He could leave Athens, live quietly elsewhere, continue his philosophical discussions in another city. Instead, Socrates proposes that Athens should reward him. He should be given free meals in the Prytaneum, the public building where the city's greatest benefactors and Olympic victors are honored. After all, he's been Athens' greatest teacher, its gadfly, its conscience. The jury is outraged. By an even larger margin this time, maybe 360 to 141, they vote for death. Even now, it's not over. The execution must wait for a religious festival to conclude. It's impious to carry out executions during sacred times. This gives Socrates' friends weeks to arrange an escape. They bribe guards, plan routes, prepare everything. Socrates simply has to agree. Imagine visiting him in prison during this time. The cell is small, with stone walls and a barred window. He's calm, extraordinarily calm. He spends his days talking with visitors, discussing philosophy, showing no fear or regret. When his friends present the escape plan, he asks them a question. He spent his life arguing that it's never right to do wrong, that we should obey the laws even when they harm us. How can he now break the law to save his life? Wouldn't that make his entire philosophy hollow? They argue with him. The charges were unjust, they say. The trial was unfair. He has no obligation to accept an unjust verdict. But Socrates sees it differently. He's chosen to live in Athens, to benefit from its laws and protection all his life. He's had every opportunity to leave, but stayed. By staying, he's implicitly agreed to abide by the city's decisions, even unjust decisions. The alternative is chaos, everyone deciding which laws to follow based on personal preference. This argument might seem absurd. Why accept death for a principle? Why not escape, continue teaching elsewhere, do more good in the world? Surely living to fight another day is the rational choice. But Socrates has spent his life insisting that how you live matters more than how long you live. That integrity isn't negotiable, that examined principles must be lived, not just discussed. This is his final teaching moment, his ultimate demonstration of living according to one's beliefs. The day of execution arrives. By Athenian custom, the condemned drinks hemlock, a poison extracted from a plant, relatively quick-acting, considered more humane than other methods of execution. His friends gather in the prison cell one last time. The mood is somber but not panicked. Socrates spends the day talking philosophy, discussing the immortality of the soul, wondering about what comes after death. He's curious, intellectually engaged, treating his final day like any other opportunity for philosophical inquiry. Imagine the light fading, afternoon turning to evening. The jailer arrives with a cup. He's apologetic, he's just doing his job, he has no personal grudge. Socrates reassures him, thanks him even. There's a strange gentleness in these final moments. The hemlock is bitter. Socrates drinks it calmly without hesitation. The jailer instructs him to walk around until his legs grow heavy, then lie down. The poison works from the extremities inward, feet and legs first, gradually moving toward the vital organs. His friends are weeping. Socrates chides them gently. They should be calm, philosophical about this. Death is either non-existence, which is like dreamless sleep, or it's a transition to another realm where he'll meet all the great figures of the past and continue asking them questions. Either way, nothing to fear. He walks. His legs grow numb. He lies down on the prison bed, covers himself with his cloak. The paralysis creeps upward. He remains conscious, still talking, still making philosophical observations. Someone notes that they owe a cock to Asclepius, the god of medicine and healing. Socrates asks them to pay the debt. This is his final recorded statement, a reminder to fulfill religious obligations, or perhaps a subtle joke about death being the cure for life's disease. The paralysis reaches his torso. His breathing becomes difficult, and then, quietly, without drama, Socrates dies. The man who never wrote a book, who never founded a school, who owned almost nothing and claimed to know nothing, has just demonstrated something profound: that principles matter more than survival, that examined truth is worth dying for, that how we face death reveals how we've lived. His death will haunt Athens. Within a few years, many will regret the verdict, will recognize that they executed perhaps the best man among them. The city will develop a kind of collective guilt about Socrates, a recognition that they destroyed something precious out of fear and resentment. And his influence will spread. His student Plato will write dialogues featuring Socrates as the main character, preserving his method and many of his ideas. Plato's student Aristotle will develop systematic philosophy that begins with Socratic questioning. The Stoics will claim Socrates as their hero. The early Christians will see in his calm acceptance of unjust death a prefiguration of their own martyr tradition. 2,000 years later, Socrates will still be taught in every philosophy course, still cited as the founder of Western philosophy, still admired for his integrity and his method. His questions, what is justice? What is virtue? How should we live? Will still be asked, still be examined, still be considered fundamental to human inquiry. Imagine him one last time, lying on that prison bed, feeling his body shut down, his mind still active and curious until the very end. Imagine his peace, his acceptance, his unshakable belief that living according to examined principles was worth any cost. And now imagine yourself here in your bed, in a world Socrates could never have imagined. A world where his questions are still asked, where his example still inspires, where a stone mason who became a philosopher is remembered while the names of his judges and accusers are mostly forgotten. Let these images settle into your mind: the marketplace conversations, the patient questioning, the trial, the prison cell, the hemlock cup. Not disturbing images but thoughtful ones, not exciting but profound. The story of a man who chose truth over comfort, principle over survival, examined life over unexamined existence. And as these thoughts drift through your consciousness, let them blend with the approach of sleep. Let them become distant, dreamlike, less distinct. Let the weight of history, the sound of ancient voices, the echo of questions 2,000 years old, all fade gently into the background as your breathing deepens. Your body relaxes, your mind releases its hold on consciousness. From the examined life of a philosopher, we turn now to an artifact, an object that shouldn't exist, a device so sophisticated, so precisely engineered, that when it was first discovered, scholars couldn't believe what they were seeing. An object that asks questions as profound as any Socrates posed, though these questions are about human capability, about lost knowledge, about what civilizations can achieve and then forget. Let's begin with the discovery, because every mystery has its moment of revelation. Imagine the Mediterranean Sea in the spring of 1900. The water is that particular shade of blue that seems almost unreal, the kind of blue that travelers try to capture in photographs but never quite manage. The sun is warm, the breeze steady. It's the perfect weather for diving. A group of Greek sponge divers is working near a small rocky island called Antikythera. The name means opposite Kythera, referring to its position relative to the larger island nearby. These waters are treacherous, with strong currents and sudden storms, but they're also rich in sponges, those curious sea creatures that attach to rocks and can be harvested, dried, and sold. The divers are using relatively new technology, copper helmets and canvas suits with air pumped down from the surface. It allows them to go deeper and stay longer than traditional freediving, though it's still dangerous work. Nitrogen narcosis, the rapture of the deep, can make divers confused and euphoric at depth. Equipment can fail. Currents can sweep a diver away from the safety line. One diver, Elias Stadiatis, descends to perhaps 45 to 50 meters, about 150 feet. The water pressure at this depth is considerable. You feel it in your ears, your sinuses, your chest. The light is dimmer here, filtered through many feet of water, taking on a greenish-blue quality that makes everything seem otherworldly. He's looking for sponges, scanning the rocky bottom, when he sees something strange, shapes that aren't natural. At first, in the dim light and with the slight narcosis that comes from breathing air under pressure, he thinks he's seeing bodies. Human bodies, arms and legs scattered across the seabed. He surfaces quickly, tells the captain what he's seen. Perhaps he's hallucinating, he thinks. Perhaps the depth has affected his mind. But the captain decides to investigate. Another diver goes down, and this time they realize the truth. Not bodies, statues, bronze statues, marble statues, lying amid the wreckage of an ancient ship. They've discovered a Roman-era vessel, probably dating to somewhere between 70 and 60 BCE, that sank while carrying a cargo of Greek art and artifacts. Perhaps the ship was traveling from Greece to Rome, carrying treasures to decorate some wealthy Roman's villa. Perhaps it was caught in one of those sudden Mediterranean storms that can turn calm seas into chaos within hours. Whatever the cause, the ship went down, taking its cargo with it, and there it lay for nearly 2,000 years, undisturbed on the seafloor. The divers begin recovering artifacts. Over the following months, they bring up statues, pottery, coins, glass vessels. The finds are spectacular. Bronze statues of ancient heroes and athletes, marble sculptures of gods and goddesses. The Greek government is thrilled. These treasures go to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Among the artifacts is something strange, a lump of corroded bronze, encrusted with marine growth, about the size of a shoebox. It's not immediately impressive. Compared to the beautiful statues, it looks like junk, just a deteriorated chunk of metal. But it's ancient, and it came from the wreck, so it's catalogued and set aside with the other finds. Months pass. The lump sits in storage, and then at some point, accounts vary on exactly when, it splits. Perhaps because the shift from underwater to air causes the corroded bronze to crack. Perhaps someone drops it accidentally, but it breaks open, and inside, museum workers see something impossible. Gears, bronze gears, intricate and precise, still held together by the corrosion, even though the original structure has partially collapsed. Inscriptions in ancient Greek, dials and pointers, the unmistakable signs of a complex mechanism. This shouldn't exist. The ancient Greeks, as far as anyone knew, didn't have this kind of technology. Geared mechanisms this sophisticated weren't supposed to appear until medieval European clockwork, over 1,000 years later. It's as if archaeologists digging in ancient Egypt found a steam engine, or excavators in Pompeii discovered a computer circuit board. The initial reactions range from confusion to denial. Some scholars suggest it must be from a later period, somehow mixed in with the ancient cargo. Others propose it's a modern piece that fell into the collection by mistake. The idea that ancient Greeks could create something this complex simply doesn't fit with what historians thought they knew. But the evidence is undeniable. The wreck is authentic, dated by the pottery and coins found with it. The corrosion patterns show the mechanism was underwater for centuries. The inscriptions are in ancient Greek script and language. Whatever this is, it's genuinely ancient. Over the following decades, scholars begin trying to understand what they're looking at. It's not easy. The mechanism is badly corroded, broken into dozens of fragments. The bronze has merged with the marine encrustation that covered it, creating a delicate, fragile mass that threatens to crumble if handled roughly. X-rays reveal internal structure, but the early X-ray technology of the 1950s and 60s can only show so much. Imagine being one of those early researchers trying to puzzle out this device. You have fragments of bronze gears, some still in their original positions, others scattered. You have partial inscriptions, instructions, labels, astronomical data. You have dials with pointers, but how does it all fit together? What was it for? How did it work? Gradually, through patient study, a picture begins to emerge. This was an astronomical calculator, a device for predicting the positions of the sun, moon, and planets. A machine that could forecast eclipses years in advance. A mechanism that encoded centuries of Greek astronomical knowledge in bronze and gear teeth. Let's try to understand what this means by imagining the device in use, intact, in the hands of its original owner. Picture yourself in Greece, perhaps on the island of Rhodes, perhaps in Alexandria, somewhere around 100 BCE. You're a scholar, a philosopher, someone interested in the movements of the heavens. You own or have access to the Antikythera Mechanism. The device is housed in a wooden case, roughly rectangular, perhaps a foot tall and 8 inches wide. The wood has long since rotted away in the sea, but we can infer its existence from the layout of the bronze pieces. The front of the case has a large dial. Imagine a clock face, but instead of 12 hours, it's divided into the 12 zodiac signs and the 365 days of the Egyptian calendar year. Behind this dial, visible through the casing, are several pointers. One represents the sun, showing its position as it moves through the zodiac over the course of a year. Another represents the moon, moving faster, completing its cycle in roughly 29.5 days. The back of the device has more dials. One is a spiral like a watch spring, divided into 223 sections. This represents the Saros cycle, a period of roughly 18 years after which eclipses repeat in a predictable pattern. The Greeks discovered this cycle through centuries of careful observation, and the mechanism encodes it mechanically. Another spiral dial tracks the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period that reconciles the solar year with the lunar month. To use the device, you turn a crank on the side. This crank is connected to the main gear, and from there the motion is distributed through dozens of smaller gears to drive all the various pointers and dials. The gear ratios are precisely calculated to represent the different periodicities of celestial bodies. The moon's gear train, for example, has to account for the fact that the moon's orbit is not perfectly regular. Sometimes it moves faster, sometimes slower, depending on its position relative to Earth and the Sun. The mechanism includes what modern engineers call a pin and slot device to simulate this variation mechanically. It's a brilliant solution to a complex problem. Turn the crank forward, and you're moving time forward. The sun pointer advances through the zodiac. The moon pointer races ahead. The planetary pointers move at their different rates. The eclipse dial clicks forward, marking the Saros cycle. If you crank forward to a particular date, say 3 years from now, you can look at the dial and see where the sun and moon will be, whether there will be an eclipse, what phase the moon will be in. Turn the crank backward, and you're moving through past time. You can verify historical dates, check when eclipses occurred, see where the planets were when some important event happened. The precision required to create this device is remarkable. The gears are hand-cut from bronze sheets, their teeth shaped to mesh smoothly with other gears. The whole mechanism contains at least 30 gears, possibly more. Some fragments are too deteriorated to identify with certainty. The teeth had to be precisely spaced, the gear ratios exactly calculated. The whole assembly fitted together with minimal friction and maximum accuracy. Think about what this requires. First, someone had to understand the mathematics of planetary motion. The Babylonians and Greeks had accumulated centuries of observational data, careful records of when planets appeared in certain positions, when eclipses occurred, the patterns and cycles of the heavens. Greek astronomers like Hipparchus had developed mathematical models to describe these motions, incorporating concepts like epicycles and eccentrics to account for the apparent irregularities in planetary movement. Then someone had to translate this mathematical knowledge into a mechanical form. They had to understand that rotating gears could represent celestial cycles, that gear ratios could embody astronomical periods. They had to design a system where multiple interconnected gears could track multiple celestial bodies simultaneously, each moving at its own rate, all driven by a single crank. Then someone had to actually build it. A craftsman with extraordinary skill had to cut the gears, assemble the components, test and adjust the mechanism until it worked accurately. This wasn't a single genius working alone. It represented the culmination of multiple fields of knowledge: astronomy, mathematics, mechanical engineering, metalworking, all brought together in this single device. The inscriptions on the mechanism provide additional information. They're written in tiny letters, barely visible, covering surfaces of the bronze plates and gears. Some are instructions: how to use the device, how to interpret the dials. Others are astronomical data, dates of eclipses, positions of planets, calendar correlations. The text is dense, technical, assuming the reader already understands Greek astronomy. One inscription describes the movement of Venus. When Venus is hidden in the evening, it comes back 584 days later in the morning. This is the synodic period of Venus, the time it takes to return to the same position relative to Earth and the Sun. The mechanism could track this. Another inscription mentions the metonic cycle of 19 years, confirming that the device incorporated this important calendrical period. The metonic cycle reconciles the solar year with the lunar month. After 19 years, the phases of the moon recur on the same days of the solar year. This was crucial for Greek calendars, which were lunisolar, trying to track both the sun and moon simultaneously. The mechanism also included predictive capabilities. The Saros dial on the back could forecast eclipses years in advance. Imagine being able to tell someone with confidence that on a specific date, 3 years from now, the sun will be eclipsed, the moon will pass between Earth and Sun, day will briefly turn to dusk. In a world where eclipses were often seen as omens, divine messages, sources of fear and wonder, this knowledge would be valuable indeed. Who made this device? We don't know. The craftsmanship suggests someone working in a major center of learning, Rhodes, Alexandria, somewhere with access to the latest astronomical knowledge and skilled craftsmen. The style of the inscriptions, the letter forms, suggest a date around 150 to 100 BCE, perhaps a bit earlier. Was it unique? Almost certainly not. Creating something this sophisticated requires a tradition of knowledge, previous attempts, accumulated expertise. The Antikythera Mechanism likely represents not a singular achievement, but the pinnacle of a tradition of astronomical instrument making. There were probably simpler versions earlier and perhaps more complex versions that we haven't found. But if such devices existed, why is this the only one that survived? Bronze was valuable. When mechanisms broke or became obsolete, they would be melted down, the metal recycled for other uses. The Antikythera Mechanism survived only because it sank to the bottom of the sea, protected from recycling by 45 meters of water and 2,000 years of time. This raises a haunting question. What else did the ancient Greeks know how to make that we've lost? What other technologies existed that left no trace because they were made from perishable materials or recyclable metals? How much knowledge has been lost? We know the Greeks could build the Antikythera Mechanism. We know they understood geared systems, precise metalworking, complex mathematical modeling of the heavens. What stopped them from taking the next steps? Why didn't they develop more advanced machinery? Mechanical calculators, the kind of precision engineering that would eventually lead to the Industrial Revolution. There are many possible answers. Perhaps the social structure of Greek society, dependent as we explored earlier on slave labor, removed the incentive for labor-saving machinery. Why build mechanical harvesters when slaves can harvest by hand? Perhaps the loss of knowledge during the various crises of late antiquity, wars, invasions, economic collapse, broke the chain of transmission. Perhaps the device was so specialized, so expensive to produce, that only a handful existed, and when they were lost, the knowledge died with them. Or perhaps, and this is a more hopeful thought, perhaps the knowledge wasn't entirely lost. Perhaps it persisted in fragments, in scattered references, in isolated traditions. The Byzantine Greeks maintained some astronomical knowledge. Islamic scholars preserved and expanded upon Greek learning. When mechanical clocks began appearing in medieval Europe, starting around the 13th century CE, were they entirely independent inventions, or did they carry faint echoes of earlier traditions? We'll likely never know with certainty. The historical record has too many gaps, too many missing pieces. But the Antikythera Mechanism stands as a reminder that history is not a simple story of progress, of steady advancement from primitive to sophisticated. Civilizations can achieve remarkable things and then lose those achievements. Knowledge can be forgotten. Technologies can disappear. Imagine holding one of the fragments in your hands. Actually, you can't do this. They're far too fragile, preserved in climate-controlled cases in Athens. But imagine if you could. Feel the weight of the corroded bronze, pitted and rough from centuries underwater. Look at the green and brown patina, the beautiful patterns corrosion creates. See the gear teeth, still recognizable after 2 millennia, each tooth a testament to some anonymous craftsman's skill. This small piece of bronze connects you to a world we thought we understood but clearly didn't. It suggests that the ancients were more capable, more sophisticated, more like us than we often imagine. They looked at the night sky and saw not just mythology, not just divine mysteries, but patterns that could be understood, predicted, encoded in mechanical form. They took abstract mathematics and made it concrete, made it bronze, made it functional. The modern study of the Antikythera Mechanism has benefited from technology its creators could never have imagined. In the early 2000s, researchers used a technique called X-ray microtomography, essentially a very high-resolution CT scan, to peer inside the fragments without destroying them. These scans revealed details invisible to the naked eye. Gear teeth still hidden within corroded masses, inscriptions on internal surfaces, the exact number and arrangement of gears. Computer scientists have built virtual reconstructions, testing different configurations to see which ones would actually work. Engineers have built physical replicas, proving that the mechanism could function as described. Historians have analyzed the astronomical models embedded in the gear ratios, determining which Greek astronomical theories the device incorporates. And with each new analysis, with each new discovery hidden in the fragments, our appreciation for this device grows. It's not just sophisticated, it's brilliant. The engineering is clever, efficient, elegant. The astronomical knowledge is accurate. The craftsmanship is superb. This wasn't a crude prototype or a lucky accident. This was a mature technology, the product of accumulated knowledge and refined technique. Picture the moment when someone first cranked the handle and watched the mechanism work. The gears turning smoothly, the pointers moving at their different speeds, the sun and moon and planets tracing their paths across the bronze dials. The device working just as designed, predicting positions that could be verified by watching the actual sky. The satisfaction of seeing mechanical motion perfectly embodying celestial motion, of holding in your hands a model of the cosmos. Or picture the moment when the ship carrying this device encountered the storm that would sink it. Perhaps it was packed carefully in a chest, wrapped in cloth, protected as the valuable object it was. Perhaps it was being transported from one scholar to another, or as a gift, or as trade goods. The crew would have fought to save the ship, But Mediterranean storms can be vicious, overwhelming even experienced sailors. The water rushing in, the ship settling, the slow descent to the seafloor. The mechanism sinking into darkness, coming to rest on the sand and rock, slowly becoming encrusted, fossilized, preserved by the very catastrophe that ended its useful life. And there it lay, for 2,000 years, while empires rose and fell, while the Roman Republic became the Roman Empire and then collapsed. While Christianity spread, while Islam arose, while the medieval period gave way to the Renaissance. While the knowledge of how to build such devices faded from memory, while astronomy and engineering had to be rediscovered, rebuilt, reinvented. The mechanism waited in the dark, preserving its secrets, until a sponge diver happened to notice unusual shapes on the seafloor on a spring day in 1900. Now it sits in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens, the fragments carefully preserved, displayed, studied. Visitors can see it, can read about it, can marvel at what the ancient Greeks achieved. The mystery has been largely solved. We understand what it is, how it worked, what it was for. But in another sense, the mystery deepens, because understanding the mechanism only raises more questions about the society that created it, about what else they knew, about what else has been lost. Let these thoughts drift through your mind as you lie here in the darkness, an ancient computer, a device impossible and yet real. Gears cut by hand 2,000 years ago, still bearing the marks of their maker's tools. A machine that embodies mathematical understanding, astronomical knowledge, mechanical genius. A reminder that human capability can exceed what we expect, that history holds surprises, that the past is stranger and more wonderful than we often imagine. The Antikythera Mechanism asks us to revise our assumptions, to remain humble about what we think we know, to recognize that every answer opens new questions. Much like Socrates' teaching that wisdom begins with knowing what we don't know, this device teaches that history is full of unknowns, of knowledge lost and waiting to be recovered, of human achievements that exceed our expectations. And with these thoughts, these images of bronze gears and ancient knowledge, of shipwrecks and mysteries, let your mind continue to drift, to wander, to release its hold on consciousness. Let the weight of 2,000 years settle gently around you. Let the darkness of deep water and museum storage blend with the darkness of approaching sleep. Let the steady turning of gears become the steady rhythm of your breathing, slow and deep and peaceful. From impossible mechanisms and lost knowledge, we return now to the human scale, to the daily rhythms of life in classical Athens, but not the life of miners or field workers that we explored at the beginning. Now, we're ascending the social ladder, entering the world of those who benefited from that foundation of labor, who lived the lives of leisure and culture that we associate with ancient Greece. Imagine yourself as a wealthy Athenian citizen, sometime around 430 BCE, during the golden age of Pericles. You're a man, for in ancient Athens, the public world of culture and politics was almost entirely male. You're probably in your 30s or 40s, established in your position, with property and investments that free you from the necessity of daily labor. Let's begin your day as morning light filters into your home. Your house is not what modern people might expect when they think of ancient Greece. There are no marble columns here, no monumental architecture. Those are reserved for temples and public buildings. Instead, your home is built of sun-dried mud brick, plastered and painted. From the street, it's actually quite plain, a blank wall with a single door designed to be secure and to preserve privacy. The Greeks didn't display wealth on the exterior of private homes. That would be vulgar, ostentatious, inviting envy and perhaps robbery. But step through that modest door, and the interior reveals something entirely different. The house is built around a central courtyard, open to the sky. This courtyard is the heart of the home, providing light and air to the rooms arranged around it. In the center, perhaps a small garden, herbs and flowers, chosen for their scent and their beauty. Maybe a small fountain or basin, the sound of trickling water adding to the peaceful atmosphere. The courtyard floor might be paved with small stones arranged in geometric patterns, or perhaps left as packed earth. The rooms that open onto this courtyard serve different functions. One is the andron, the men's dining room where you'll entertain guests. This is perhaps the most elaborately decorated room in the house. The floor is covered with a mosaic, small colored stones fitted together to create patterns or even pictorial scenes. The walls are plastered and painted with murals depicting scenes from mythology, geometric designs in red and black, or simple color bands that give the space warmth and character. Against the walls are couches, not for sitting but for reclining. The Greeks take their formal meals lying on their left side, propped on one elbow, leaving the right hand free for eating and drinking. The couches are arranged around the room, creating a space where 7 to 9 men can dine together, all facing inward, able to see and converse with each other easily. Other rooms include storage spaces, a kitchen area where slaves prepare food, sleeping chambers for the family. The women's quarters, the gynoeceum, are typically in a more private area of the house, away from the spaces where male guests might venture. Your wife and daughters live much of their lives in these rooms, managing the household, working with wool, overseeing the domestic slaves who do the actual labor of cooking, cleaning, washing, and maintaining the home. But let's not dwell in the domestic spaces. You're waking now, in your private chamber. A slave brings water in a ceramic basin for washing. The water is cool, drawn from the household cistern where rainwater is collected. You splash your face, rinse your hands, feeling the pleasant shock of cold water bringing you fully awake. Dressing is simple. You wear a chiton, a rectangular piece of woolen cloth, folded and pinned at the shoulders, belted at the waist. The wool is fine, softer than the coarse fabric slaves wear. Perhaps it's dyed in a subtle color, madder red, woad blue, saffron yellow. Or perhaps you prefer the natural off-white of undyed wool, considering bright colors somewhat effeminate. You might add a himation, a larger cloak draped over one shoulder and wrapped around your body, useful for warmth and for making public appearances with appropriate dignity. You break your fast simply, bread dipped in wine, perhaps some olives, a few figs. The Greeks don't emphasize breakfast the way modern cultures do. The main meal will come later in the day. Your morning is occupied with business and civic duties. Perhaps you visit the agora, where you discuss matters with other citizens. Perhaps you attend the assembly if it's meeting today, listening to proposals, casting your vote on policy questions. Perhaps you're serving on a jury. Athens uses large citizen juries, sometimes hundreds of men, chosen by lot to hear cases. The pay is small, but it's considered part of civic duty. Or perhaps today, you're overseeing your property. You own farmland outside the city, worked by slaves under the supervision of an overseer. You own a workshop where craftsmen produce pottery or metalwork, again staffed by skilled slaves who pay you a portion of their earnings. You might own a merchant ship or shares in several ships that trade around the Mediterranean, importing grain from Egypt or the Black Sea region, exporting olive oil and wine and manufactured goods. These investments require attention. You check accounts, discuss production with your overseer, plan for the coming season's planting or the next trading voyage. But you don't do physical labor yourself. That would be beneath your status. A wealthy citizen manages and directs. Slaves and hired workers execute. By afternoon, you return home. The day's heat is growing oppressive. Athens in summer can be quite hot, and the sun reflects harshly off the white limestone and marble of the public buildings. Your courtyard offers shade and relative coolness. You might rest briefly, dozing in the afternoon heat, or you might read scrolls of Homer or Hesiod, perhaps works by contemporary authors, philosophers, historians. But the day's highlight will come this evening. You're hosting a symposium. The symposium is a central institution of Greek male culture, a drinking party, yes, but also much more. It's where philosophy is discussed, poetry is recited and created, political alliances are formed, cultural values are transmitted and debated. To understand elite Greek culture, you must understand the symposium. Preparations have been underway all day. Slaves have cleaned the andron thoroughly, swept and washed the floor, arranged the couches with fresh cushions and throws. They've set out small tables beside each couch, not for dining exactly, but for holding cups, for placing food within easy reach. They've prepared the food itself: bread, cheese, olives, nuts, small pieces of meat or fish, all cut into bite-sized portions that can be eaten easily while reclining. They've mixed wine in large craters, ceramic vessels where wine is combined with water, usually in a ratio of 3 or 4 parts water to 1 part wine. The Greeks rarely drink wine undiluted. To do so would be considered barbaric, dangerously intoxicating. Your guests begin arriving as the sun sets. 7 men, 8 including yourself. They're your peers, wealthy citizens, some involved in politics, others in commerce, all educated, all part of Athens' cultural elite. They're greeted at the door by a slave. They remove their sandals. Feet will be washed, a gesture of hospitality and cleanliness. They're shown to the andron, each taking a position on one of the couches. The initial conversation is light, catching up on news, discussing the day's events in the assembly or the agora. Slaves circulate with the food, keeping the small tables supplied. The eating is gradual, casual, not the focus of the evening. After the food comes the main part of the symposium, the drinking and conversation. You, as host, are the symposiarch, the master of the drinking. You decide how strong the wine will be mixed tonight. You propose the toasts. You direct the conversation and entertainment. The wine is poured into cups, kylix, shallow bowls with 2 handles and a stem, often decorated with beautiful painted scenes. Black figure or red figure pottery, showing mythological scenes, athletic competitions, symposium scenes depicting events like the one you're experiencing. You lift your cup in a toast to Zeus, to Athena, to Athens itself. The others join and everyone drinks. The conversation begins to deepen. One of your guests has recently returned from traveling in Sicily, and he describes the Greek colonies there, the differences in culture and dialect, the political tensions between the various city-states. Another guest raises the question of whether the Spartans will honor their peace agreement or whether war is inevitable. This leads to a discussion of Sparta itself, the Spartan system of education, their military prowess, the strange social structure where citizens are forbidden to engage in trade or crafts, depending entirely on their helot population for labor. Someone quotes Homer, a passage about Achilles choosing a short, glorious life over a long, quiet one. This leads to a philosophical discussion about honor and mortality. Is glory worth dying for? Is it better to live without fame or die young with reputation intact? The conversation circles these questions, various guests offering different perspectives, quoting poetry, citing historical examples. You notice that one of the younger guests, perhaps the son of one of your friends, invited to learn how symposiums work, is speaking too boldly, offering opinions without sufficient thought. You gently redirect him, suggest he listen more before speaking. This is part of the symposium's educational function, teaching young men how to think, how to argue, how to hold their wine and conduct themselves in sophisticated company. As the evening progresses and the wine takes effect, the atmosphere becomes more relaxed. Someone calls for entertainment. A slave girl enters, not Greek, probably from Asia Minor or Thrace, purchased specifically for her musical skills. She carries an aulos, a double-piped wind instrument with a reedy nasal tone. She plays, and the music fills the andron, echoing slightly off the plastered walls. The music is complex, using modes and scales that sound somewhat foreign to modern ears. Not quite major or minor as we understand them, but something in between. The rhythm is intricate, sophisticated. Some of your guests nod along, clearly appreciating the performance. Others continue their conversations, the music becoming pleasant background. After the music, perhaps poetry. One guest is known for his skill at improvising verses in the style of the great lyric poets. He composes a poem on the spot about friendship and wine and the pleasures of good company. It's clever, well constructed, fitting the traditional meters perfectly. Everyone applauds, perhaps playfully critiques certain word choices, suggests alternative phrasings. Another guest proposes a game, Kotobos. This involves flinging wine dregs from your cup at a target, trying to knock a small disc off a stand. It requires skill and coordination, and it becomes more difficult as the evening progresses and more wine is consumed. There's laughter, friendly wagering, playful competition. Through all of this, the conversation continues, weaving between serious topics and light banter. Someone asks about Socrates. Has anyone spoken with him recently? Yes, says one guest. He encountered the strange philosopher in the agora just yesterday, asking annoying questions about the nature of justice. Everyone laughs, but there's also genuine interest. What does Socrates actually believe? Is he serious about knowing nothing? The discussion becomes philosophical again, examining epistemology, the nature of knowledge, how we can be certain of anything. Hours pass. The wine continues to flow, though you're all experienced symposiasts, pacing yourselves, avoiding the crude drunkenness that would be shameful. The conversation ranges widely: politics, philosophy, poetry, gossip, jokes, serious debate. This is leisure in its highest form, the Greeks would say. Not idleness, but time spent cultivating the mind, strengthening friendships, engaging with ideas. Eventually the party begins to wind down. Some guests have drunk more than others and are becoming drowsy. The host, you, signals that it's time to conclude. Final toasts are offered, libations poured to the gods, thanks expressed for the evening's pleasure. Slaves bring the guests sandals, help them with their cloaks. Those who live nearby walk home through the dark streets, perhaps accompanied by a slave carrying a torch. Those from farther away might stay the night in guest rooms. You retire to your chamber. A slave helps you out of your chiton, brings fresh water for washing. You lie down on your bed, not the elaborate piece of furniture modern people imagine, but a simple wooden frame with leather straps supporting a mattress of wool or straw covered with woven blankets, comfortable enough and familiar. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on the evening. Good conversation, good wine, good company. This is what makes life worth living, you think. Not luxury exactly. The meal was simple, the entertainment modest, but the intellectual stimulation, the exchange of ideas, the fellowship of educated men. This is the point of having wealth and leisure. And indeed, this is what Athenian democracy was designed to preserve. The system of government, with its rotation of offices, its payment for jury service, its brief terms that prevented anyone from monopolizing power, all of this was meant to ensure that citizens could participate in public life without being too burdened by it. The goal was to create space for exactly this kind of cultivated leisure, this pursuit of excellence in thought and culture. Of course, as we explored in the first segment, this leisure depended absolutely on slavery. The symposium was possible because slaves prepared the food, served the wine, cleaned up afterward. The day spent at the assembly or discussing philosophy was possible because slaves were managing your property, working your fields, conducting your business. The entire structure of Athenian culture rested on that foundation of unfree labor. The Athenians were aware of this, at least implicitly. They understood that their way of life required a large population of slaves, but they didn't see it as a contradiction. Leisure wasn't considered laziness. It was considered the highest use of human potential. Physical labor was necessary, but it was beneath the dignity of a citizen. Better to have that labor done by those who, in Aristotle's later formulation, were naturally suited for it. We, with our different values and historical distance, can see the profound injustice of this system. We can recognize that human potential is not distributed according to legal status, that the slaves working in the mines or fields were no less human than the citizens debating philosophy. But understanding the Greek perspective, even if we reject it, helps us understand how civilizations can achieve remarkable cultural heights while resting on morally troubling foundations. Think about the contrast we've explored tonight. The miner coughing in dark tunnels, extracting silver that funded Athens' glory. The field worker harvesting olives he would never taste. The slave standing for sale in the marketplace, evaluated like livestock. And then the wealthy citizen, reclining on his couch, drinking fine wine, discussing abstract concepts with his educated friends. Both experiences were real. Both were part of the same society, the same moment in history. The culture that produced Socrates and the Parthenon and the Antikythera Mechanism also produced Laurian silver mines and household servitude. Democratic ideals and systematic exploitation coexisted, interpenetrated, made each other possible. This isn't meant to condemn the Greeks entirely. Every civilization has its moral blind spots, its areas of injustice that seem obvious in retrospect but were invisible or rationalized at the time. Future generations will undoubtedly judge our own society, our own blind spots, with similar clarity. The point is to see history whole, to understand both achievement and cost, to recognize that golden ages cast dark shadows. Imagine one more scene before we conclude. It's the morning after the symposium. You wake in your comfortable bed, perhaps slightly foggy from last night's wine, but generally well rested. A slave brings water for washing. Another slave brings your morning bread and olives. You dress and step out into your courtyard, feeling the cool morning air, seeing the sky lighten above the open space. In the streets outside, the city is waking. Merchants are opening their stalls in the agora. Craftsmen are beginning their work in the small shops that line the streets. Slaves are carrying water from public fountains, hauling goods to and from the port, sweeping the streets. The free citizens are emerging from their homes, beginning another day of civic and cultural life. In the fields outside the city walls, agricultural slaves are already at work. They rose before dawn, as always. In the mines at Lorient, night and day matter little. The work continues in shifts, in darkness, in the timeless underground world where silver is extracted at such human cost. The city functions, the civilization continues, the extraordinary cultural flowering of classical Athens unfolds. Philosophy, drama, art, democracy, all sustained by this complex, contradictory social system. And somewhere in this city, Socrates is waking too. He's putting on his worn chiton, stepping out into the streets, already thinking about the questions he'll ask today. Who will he encounter? What assumptions will he challenge? What conversations will he start that will echo across millennia? Perhaps he passes by the wealthy houses like yours, aware of the comfort inside but uninterested in it. Perhaps he stops at a workshop where craftsmen are already working, discussing with them the nature of their craft, whether technical skill is related to moral excellence. Perhaps he heads to the agora, looking for conversation, for interlocutors, for opportunities to examine life. His path might cross with slaves going about their errands, but he probably doesn't notice them particularly. They're part of the background of Athenian life, as unremarkable as the buildings or the street stones. Even the man who questioned everything rarely questioned this. And so our journey through ancient Athens comes to its end. We've walked many paths tonight, haven't we? Descended into silver mines where men labored in darkness, their lungs filling with dust, their bodies breaking slowly under the weight of extraction. Stood in marketplaces where human beings were bought and sold, valued in coins that came from those same mines. followed the life of Socrates, from stonemason to philosopher, from questioner to martyr, from living voice to eternal symbol. Encountered an impossible artifact, bronze gears that encoded centuries of astronomical knowledge, a reminder that history is stranger than we imagine. And reclined at a symposium, experiencing the leisure and culture that made Athens famous, understanding the foundation upon which that culture rested. These stories, these images, these moments separated from us by more than 2 millennia, can feel impossibly distant. The ancient Greeks lived in a world so different from ours, a world without electricity or engines, without modern medicine or communication technology, without our concepts of human rights or equality. Their gods were different, their social structures alien, their daily realities far removed from contemporary life. And yet they were human, exactly as we are human. They felt pain and pleasure, hope and fear. They wondered about the stars, questioned their societies, created beauty, caused suffering. They loved their children, feared death, sought meaning. The miner, struggling in darkness, wanted relief from his labor just as anyone would. The philosopher facing death wanted his life to have meant something. The wealthy citizen enjoying his symposium wanted good conversation and the respect of his peers. History is not a simple story. It doesn't move in straight lines from primitive to advanced, from dark to light. The Greeks achieved things we still admire: democracy, philosophy, art, mathematics, while practicing slavery on a scale that shocks us. They could calculate eclipses and build the Antikythera Mechanism, but couldn't or wouldn't question the fundamental injustice of human bondage. They produced Socrates and also executed him. What should we take from this? Perhaps simply that human civilization is always complex, always contradictory, always mixing light and shadow. That progress in one area doesn't guarantee progress in all areas. That every society, including our own, has blind spots, injustices so deeply embedded that they become invisible to those living within them. But there's comfort in this knowledge too. You lie here now, in a world the ancient Greeks could never have imagined, a world where slavery, the absolute ownership of one person by another, is legally impossible, condemned universally even if other forms of exploitation persist. A world where questions about justice and equality are asked by everyone, not just a few philosophers. A world where knowledge isn't lost as easily, where technologies don't disappear into the sea and wait 2,000 years to be rediscovered. You lie in comfort they couldn't have conceived. Climate control, artificial light, medicine that can cure diseases that killed whole populations, communication with anyone, anywhere in the world. The silver that wealthy Athenians valued is in your world less precious than information, than knowledge, than the ability to connect and create. And yet Socrates' questions remain relevant. What is justice? What is virtue? How should we live? The examined life is still worth pursuing, still requires courage, still demands that we question our assumptions and challenge comfortable certainties. Let these thoughts rest gently in your mind as sleep approaches. The weight of history, not as burden, but as context. The recognition that human beings have always struggled with similar questions, even if the specific circumstances change. The understanding that we're part of a long, complex, continuing story, building on what came before while trying to move beyond its limitations. Picture the ancient Mediterranean one last time. The blue water, the rocky islands, the olive groves silver green in the sunlight, the cities of white stone, the temples with their painted columns, the marketplaces full of voices, the mines beneath the earth, dark and deep, the ships crossing the sea, some carrying cargo, some carrying ideas, one carrying an impossible mechanism down to the seafloor where it would wait for 2 millennia. Picture Socrates in the agora, asking his questions, challenging certainties, living according to his examined principles until the very end. Picture all of this fading now, becoming softer, more distant, like a dream half remembered. the ancient world receding into time, into history, into the comfortable darkness that surrounds you now. Your breathing is slow and steady. Your body is relaxed, released from the tensions of the day. Your mind is drifting, thoughts flowing without effort, images and ideas blending into each other, becoming less distinct, less important. The ancient Greeks, with all their achievements and failings, are distant now. Their struggles are over, their questions answered or abandoned, their lives completed long ago. They've become stories, lessons, examples, no longer urgent, no longer demanding, simply present in the great library of human experience, available when we need them, but not insisting on attention. And you are here now, safe and comfortable, carrying forward the long project of human civilization in your own small way, asking your own versions of eternal questions, living your examined or unexamined life, trying to do better or simply trying to endure. Let it all go now, the minds and the symposiums, the mechanisms and the philosophers, the questions and the answers. Let them all fade into the gentle darkness of sleep. Rest well. The ancient world can wait. History will still be there tomorrow, full of stories and lessons and mysteries. But for now, for these quiet hours, there is only this moment, this breath, this slow release into unconsciousness. Sleep.